All right, so we're going to talk about boundaries. But whenever we think of boundaries, we don't really think about ourselves and boundaries with ourselves. And so we're going to be talking about that. And I think the book is going to talk about how ourself, where it's actually one of the most difficult boundaries to set. So that's where we're going. My own worst enemy. Sarah heaved a long sigh. She's been working on a major boundary issue in her therapy for a while now. She was seeing progress in resolving responsibility conflicts with her parents and her family. Yet today she introduced a new issue. I haven't told you about this relationship before. I have tremendous boundary problems with this woman. She eats too much. She has an attacking tongue. She lets me down all the time. And she has spent money of mine and hasn't paid me back in years. Why haven't you mentioned it before? Why haven't you mentioned her before? I said. Because she's me, Sarah replied.
Oh, um, the Bible and all of psychological research affirm an important reality about healthy, fulfilled, happy people. They have something called self control. Galatians 5 tells us that it is a fruit of the Spirit, and we are called to develop it. As all of us can attest, we all struggle in one area or another with self control and maintaining good boundaries with ourselves. The most common struggle deal with food, money, time, task completion, words, and sexuality.
Okay. So the Bible talks about self control, and it's basically talking about how it is hard for us to control ourselves. It's so easy to say, like, oh, don't do this or don't do that to somebody else, but to do it to ourselves. Yeah. Let's keep going. Melin.
I'm throwing my no away, Justin told me. It works fine for setting limits on other people, but every time I try to use it on myself, it breaks down. As you read about the out of control areas above, you may have felt defeated and frustrated with yourself. Perhaps you could identify with one or more of the problem areas and are no stranger to the discouragement of not having reliable or effective boundaries even. What's the problem? Why doesn't our no work on ourselves?
Hmm.
Why doesn't our no work on ourselves?
Yeah. So really quick, go back to your groups. Do you guys agree? So this person is basically saying, I can set boundaries with other people, but I can't set boundaries to myself. Basically, I can't control myself. Myself, I keep saying, no, I shouldn't spend money like this, but I keep spending it. I shouldn't spend time like this, but I keep spending it like this. Right? So you're setting boundaries for yourself, but yourself breaks those boundaries. Okay? And so, can you resonate with that number one? And number two, why do you think we have such a hard time? Like, why do we keep breaking our own boundaries like that? Okay, so those are two questions. Number one, can you resonate? Number two is why do you think we have these issues? Go for it with your groups. We're going to talk about three different reasons why our no's, why doesn't no work on ourselves. Okay, why we have boundaries with ourselves. Abel, number one.
We are our own worst enemies. An external problem is easier to deal with than an internal one. Previously, we were only responsible to, not for, the other party. Now we have a great deal more involvement. When you are around a critical person, you set limits on your exposure to this person's constant criticism. You can change subjects, rooms, houses, or continents, but what if this critical person is in your own head?
Mm-hmm.
What if you have met the enemy and the enemy is you?
Woo. Okay, so that's what it's talking about. So the first idea is that always externally things are easier when it's external because you could just remove yourself from the situation. Okay, but what's if it's internal? If it's internal, it goes. How are you gonna
Run away.
how you gonna leave?
Yourself.
Yeah, I mean you could distract yourself, but even that, like you have that problem within you. So wherever you go, that problem is gonna exist for you everywhere. So that's number one. Number two.
We withdraw from relationships when we most need it. Jessica came to me for treatment of an eating disorder. When I asked her if she had told anyone about her problem. Tears welled up in her eyes. That's too much. This is a private problem. Can't I do this without anyone knowing? Secrecy is not a recent problem. Remember how Adam and Eve hid from God after they ate the forbidden fruit? Ever since the fall, our instincts have been to withdraw from relationship when we're in trouble, even when we most need other people. Due to our lack of security, our loss of grace, our shame, and our pride, we turn inward rather than outward when we're in trouble.
Okay. So again, when you have issue with somebody else, then again, you could just remove yourself and that's good. But what if you have problem with yourself? Then you need somebody else to help you. But if you don't reach out, because our tendency is whenever there's like internal issues, then we try to like go in and we don't want to share it because we feel shameful or we feel like, oh, I could do it by myself. And so we go inward. But that's the time actually when we need to like ask for help and seek community. Let's keep going. Luis?
Whatever our problem is, we can't solve it in a vacuum. If we could, we would. But the more we isolate ourselves, the harder our struggle becomes. Just like an untreated cancer can become life-threatening in a short time, self-boundary problems will worsen with increased aloneness. We must seek help from your family and or body of Christ, church.
Okay. So this is very important because it's hard to keep yourself accountable. Right? It's hard to like just like say, oh, like good job to yourself. But it's much better when you have somebody outside doing that for you, keeping you accountable, encouraging you, giving you a different perspective. But when we're going through a difficult time, when we can't keep our boundaries, we feel shameful. And because of that, we don't share. And so that's another issue that we have. Number 3.
We try to use willpower to solve our boundary problems. This is the most common approach to out of control behavior. The problem with this approach is that it makes an idol out of the will, something God never intended. Just as our hearts and minds are distorted by sin, so is our power to make right decisions. If we depend on willpower alone, we are guaranteed to fail. We are denying the power of the relationship promised in the cross. If all we need is our will to overcome evil, we certainly don't need a savior.
Yeah, this is actually pretty important. I can go more in depth with this, but I won't. So the concept is we think that because we don't have self-control, we think we could just will it. Does that make sense? Like I'll just try harder and I'll go harder. And that's the problem, is that I'm not trying harder. Okay? But the Bible describes self-control as one of the fruit of the Spirit. Does that make sense? So what that tells us is that we not just have a will problem, of course there is that too, but we have a sin problem as well. So Paul says it like this. He says, there's things I want to do, but I keep not doing it because of my sin. Not because I just don't have a strong will. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying like there aren't lazy people, that some people need to try harder, but it's a lot more than that too. It's not just, I just have weak will and I just need to try harder. And I need to just will myself more. Okay?
Does that mean it's our sins that are holding us back?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So no matter how much we try, how hard we like will ourselves to do good, we can't. And so that's why Jesus talks about how we need to have a regenerated, like a new heart, so that we can actually do good. Yeah. Let's keep going. Developing strength and maturity in self-boundary is not easy. Many obstacles hinder our progress. However, God desires our maturity and self-control even more than we do. One way to begin developing limits on our out-of-control behavior is to apply a modified version of the boundary checklist. And then we'll go over the checklist soon. Okay? So once again, let's go over it. Number 1, the problem is not external, but it's internal. So we ourselves are the problem. That's number 1. Number 2, we withdraw ourselves from community when we need it. And number 3, we can't just will it. Like it's not, the power is outside of us. So we need to actually seek higher power, but yet we try to like, I just woman up or man up and try to do this. Which one of these can you resonate with? Go back to your groups and then discuss. All right, let's continue on. So let's see what this boundary checklist is. And then we'll we'll probably do lab next week on this. Yeah. Number 1, what are the symptoms? Look at the destructive fruit that you may be exhibiting by not being able to say no to yourself. So because you're not setting good boundaries, what are some of the consequences that are happening in your lives? And so I'm sure most of us are aware of these different boundary issues. You may be experiencing depression, anxiety, phobia, rage, relationship struggles. All of the symptoms can be related to difficulty in setting limits on your own behavior. Okay? Use them as a roadmap to begin identifying the particular boundary problems you're having. So the best way to know whether you have boundary issues or not is to see what kind of issues you have in your life. Or another way to put it, what areas of your life are you unhappy with? Okay? So next week we'll go over it more specifically, but that's what you do first. Because you go, oh, is that a problem with my boundary? Right? So look at what the issues are first, then you go and see, okay, is this something I need to take care of? Number 2.
What are the roots? Identifying the causes of your self-boundary problems will assist you in understanding your own contribution to the problem. How you have failed or sinned, your developmental injuries, how you have been sinned against, and the significant relationships that may have contributed to the problem.
Yeah. So again, you see the issue, you see the problems, then you deep dive and you diagnose it and you go, okay, is this my issue? Or is this a boundary with somebody else's issue that's causing these issues? Does that make sense? Because you might think, oh, I just need to say no to myself, but maybe this is a boundary issue with like somebody else too. Okay? So we have to clarify, is this boundary issue with myself or is this with other people? All right, let's go to number 3. Oh, let's keep going.
Some possible roots of self-boundary complex include these. A. Lack of training. Some people never learn to set limits, to pay the consequence of their actions, or to delay gratification when they were growing up. For example, they may never have experienced any consequences for falling as a child.
Does that make sense? So if
Stop.
I have no idea, I need to look it up.
What, dogleg? Idling.
Oh, idling.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, waste time, be slow. So again, if you grew up as your parents, like my parents are like this. Like I didn't have consequences for my actions. Okay. So again, if you grow up like that, what's gonna happen? Then you're not gonna set limits for yourself because you don't know how to deal with like your own boundaries. Right? Your parents never really taught you to set boundaries. So you go, oh, I can do whatever I want then. Okay. So let's keep going. So you don't have training. Let's keep going. B.
Rewarded destructiveness. People who come from families in which the mom or dad was an alcoholic may have learned that out of control behavior brings relationships. What? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Out of control behavior brings relationships. The family came together when the alcoholic member drank.
Mm-hmm.
Distorted needed. Some boundary problems are legitimate. God-given needs in
Disguise.
God gave us sexual desire both for reproductive and to enjoy our spouses. Those suffering a pornography addiction have diverted this good desire. They feel real and alive only when acting out sexually.
Okay, so B is talking about like sometimes like kids like they act out, and the reason why they're acting out is that's the only way they can get a response from like their guardians or their parents. And so that's the only way to get attention. If they acted well, they didn't get attention. So they realize, oh, if I act out, then I'll get some attention. And so there's certain things perhaps we do, okay, where we do these destructive things to ourselves, even though it's not good for us, but if we feel like we get rewarded somehow. It's kind of like a weird way of looking at it, but that's B. And C is this idea, basically we have, all of us have some needs, but it becomes distorted. It becomes corrupted. Like food is in itself, right? We can say it's a very good thing, but sometimes we can go overboard, and that could become gluttony, or that can become like an obsession. How come I can't say that word? Obsession. Yeah. And the same thing with sex as well. Sex is supposed to be a gift that God has given to us, but we could see a whole bunch of corruptions with that. Okay. So instead, we need God to really help us to get those needs. Does that make sense? All right, let's keep going.
Fear of relationship. People really want to be loved, but their out of control behavior, for example, overeating or overworking, keeps others away. Some people use their words to keep other people at bay. Unmet emotional hungers. We all need love during the first few years of life. If we don't receive this love, we hunger for it for the rest of our lives. This hunger for love is so powerful that when we don't find it in relationships with other people, we look for it in other places, such as in food, in sexual activity, or in spending money.
Yeah. So again, if I do certain things, then people will be, they'll stay away from me. Kind of approach is D. And so I'll do destructive things so that people will stay away from me. Because I don't want to get hurt. Or I'm scared of people. Okay, I know people like this. E, unmet emotional hunger. This is pretty simple, right? So you don't feel like you got that. We talked about attachment. Very important in childhood. If you feel like you didn't have appropriate attachment, right, you're always going to have this sense of insecurity. Or sense of things are going wrong and I have to do something to earn people's love. Okay, let's keep going. Luis?
Being under the law, many Christians raised in legalistic environments were not permitted to make decisions for themselves. When they try to make their own decisions, they feel guilty. This guilt forces them to rebel. Food addictions and compulsive spending are often reactions against strict rules.
Yeah. So because they had no control over their lives, they find destructive ways to have a sense of control over their lives. Because they couldn't control it, they go, okay, I'm going to eat whatever I want. Now I feel like I have a sense of control in my life. All these other parts I don't have control, but food, I can eat whatever I want. Does that make sense? All right, so a lot of different issues here. Okay, so again, next week we'll go a lot more deep into all of these things because we're going to actually think about it. All right, let's keep going. Number 3.
Who needs to take ownership at this point? Take the painful step of taking responsibility for your out of control behavior. The behavior pattern may be directly traceable to family problems, neglect, abuse, or trauma. In other words, our boundary conflicts may not be all our fault. They are, however, our responsibility.
Yeah. So again, we looked at the symptoms. We diagnosed the symptoms. Now we have to take responsibility for it. Okay? So we have to come in terms with, this is the hard part too. Sometimes some of us, we diagnosed everything, but sometimes we blame our parents and we go, my parents have to fix this. It's my parents' fault. Or we go, my spouse's fault. Or my society fault. Or politics fault. Or whatever fault. And some of it might be true. But in the end, we have to acknowledge if we're going to make changes, then it has to be the responsibility is us. Yeah. So we can't change what happened in the past, but we can do something about it right now. Okay. And some people will get stuck here. This is quite difficult. Number 4, what do you need? It's useless to try to deal with your internal boundary conflicts until you're actively developing safe, trusting, grace, and truth relationship with others. You're severely hampered in gaining either insight into or control over yourself when you're disconnected from God's source of spiritual and emotional fuel. And also connecting with people is a time-consuming, risky, and painful process. Finding the right people, group, or church is hard enough, but after joining up, admitting your needs to others may be even more difficult. However, plugging into a group that is neither an option nor a luxury, it is a spiritual, emotional, life and death issues. So basically, it's having a good vertical and horizontal relationship, right? Because this, as you can imagine, this is a lot of stuff. Okay, this is like self-therapy, basically. I mean, this is therapy, right, in some sense. And so that's a lot of work. Okay, this is not easy. A lot of people don't do it because they don't have people that they can lean on. And so the concept is we have to get spiritual, emotional. We have to become spiritually and emotionally healthy by having a good relationship with God, but also with church as well. And hopefully, I don't know if we're 100% there yet, but that's what we're always aiming for at our church. Let's keep going. Oh, actually, before we go to the how do I begin, just kind of talk about what you think so far. So again, let's go over the steps. Step number 1, what are the symptoms? So it's kind of like just like any issues, right? You have issues. It's like, what is the issue? Diagnose it. Okay, why is there this issue? And then I have to take responsibility for it. And then to start doing it, I actually need like resource to do stuff, right? To change. Okay, and the resource has to be God and people. All right, get together with your groups once again and kind of talk about what you think. Where do you think you're at? Go for it.